Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. What is up, everybody? Wow, episode 200. Feels like yesterday that I was sitting with my friends Ben Joy Walker and Sean Lazio out in Portland, Oregon after a raving New Year's party where we did our first episode together. You know, it's really awesome having amazing friends like them because I mentioned to them as we were sitting in a circle, I was like, I really want to start this podcast that I've been thinking about starting. And they were like, what's the idea of it? And I was like, it's called This One Time on Psychedelics. And they're like, dude, that sounds amazing. How did you come up with that idea? And this is something I don't think I've ever shared in the show. So I wanted to share it with you guys as a special for episode 200, because I think it gives context for how this thing got started and also what really makes me me. Because I love fun, I love adventure, and I love synchronicities. And so all three of those are included into this story. And so in August of 2020, I had my whole life changed. I went from working at the dispensary about 6 months prior rather, to getting into coaching and meeting all these new people through the Enlifted program. And so I had hung out with a lot of these people on Zoom before. But in August of 2020, Mark England, who's been on the show before, reached out to me and said, hey, man, I'm having some guys down at the lake house in Virginia. You should come. I'm not going to take no for an answer. So let me know when I'm picking you up at the airport, and I will. So I was like, hell yeah, let's send it. So I went down there and I met a lot of these people that I had known as Zoom icons before that in real life. And at that get together, I heard one of my buddies, Chris Marhefka, who's also been in the show, talking about how he was going to be hosting a men's retreat in Colorado in about 2 weeks. And so I decided to say yes to that too. And so when I went out to that adventure, I got picked up at the airport by this guy, Bobby, with a huge van with like 16 people in there. Some I had met already down at Mark's, some I had met online, but not in person yet, and some were brand new to me. So I'm sitting way in the back of this van and I'm just spouting off stories about psychedelic experiences I've had. And one kid turns around and he's like, you should start a podcast and call it This One Time on Psychedelics. And in that moment, ladies and gentlemen, I knew that I was going to do that. So now fast forward all the way to about a year later, and I'm sitting in this room in Oregon, and I share this idea with my friends. And my buddy Sean says, well, dude, I have the equipment. Let's just go upstairs and do it. I'm like, I love you, man, because you know what? How many times throughout our lives, right? Or I'll make it personal. How many times throughout my life have I wanted to do something, but the thinking about doing it has just kept me pushing it off for a long time? So what I learned in that little adventure there was just take quick action. If it's coming from the heart, take quick action. What's the best thing that could happen? A lot of us like to, or we've been trained to think of what's the worst thing that can happen. But really, I like to change that. What's the best thing that can happen, right? Originally, I was pretty nervous. I'm like, I don't know if I want to put myself out there with this stuff. I come from a world where this stuff is not safe to talk about. Things of that nature, many things like you guys can agree with. I think most of us grew up in a time where cannabis, psychedelics, et cetera, were not as culturally acceptable as they are today. And we still have a long way to go. But there was a lot of fear and trepidation in me. I had already started the Highly Optimized podcast. I loved podcasting, but I didn't know, should I do this? Should I not? So shout out to Sean and Ben for just being like, let's just go do it. And we did it. And it was amazing. It was so much fun. And it's really cool too, because, why I really wanted to start this podcast, This One Time on Psychedelics, is not only to share the stories and the experiences that you guys hear often, which are great. They're amazing. But at the same time, it was really to, normalize the conversation around psychedelic medicines. And also to give people a very real look at what these medicines are capable of doing, both on the, oh my God, awe-inspiring side, and also on the, uh-oh, I might have taken too much type of side as well. And so, again, like I couldn't really find a place online where I could go to find out all the beautiful things and all the challenging things too. And I didn't start this podcast to make everyone think that psychedelics are the only path to healing. Because as one of my ethoses states, there are many paths that get you to the same destination. But the only one that you can consider quote unquote wrong is the one that tells you there's only one way to get there. Now, when you guys think about that statement, I want you to illuminate and evaluate all the different times in your life that you may have been told, this is the only way. This is the only way to get there, right? I didn't want to give the world a taste of their medicine, which would be more of that fear of like, if you're not doing this, you're missing out. I wanted to give them a taste of my medicine, which is this is what's worked for me. And if you're thinking you want to try this, there's some things you want to be aware of, right? There's a reason why I talk often about getting puddled with LSD, eating way too many mushrooms, right? These are things that I went through. So hopefully the next person doesn't have to go through them. And again, I don't regret those things. They made me who I am today. But I do consider myself very fortunate and very lucky to have been in the situations I was in when those things happened and with the people I was with when they happened. Because as anyone who's gone on a very high dose of anything understands, there are many things that can lead to a psychic break and a lot of things like that if you decide to accidentally puddle yourself with LSD at a music festival with 50,000 people, let's say, right? So, again, a lot of the reason I tell these experiences is so people understand what to do and maybe, soft talk acknowledged, what not to do. And I say maybe because at the end of the day, who would I be to think that I have the right answers, right? That this is the only way. No, you can't take too much. That may be part of someone's path, right? It may be part of their karma. It may be something that I don't want to interrupt, right? But for the people that maybe it's not part of their journey, I don't want them to think they have to get themselves in over their head to have these kind of beautiful experiences. Like I said before, in my life, psychedelics have been a profound path to healing. Some of you guys might have caught my recent episode on Danny Morell's podcast, the Higher Self podcast. And it was funny because when I was reading the comments, I learned a long time ago to not argue with anyone in the comments, mainly because I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm not on any podcast or on this podcast trying to say that this is the only way, like I said before, right? Cannabis is one way of infinite ways that you can get closer to God or source or whatever you want to call that omniscient power, greater than just our individual selves. And so I was reading the comments and it's interesting to me, right? I went to school for psychology, so I'm fascinated by people's minds. And when I was reading the comments, I see these people saying like, there's only one pathway to healing and it's through Jesus. Not realizing that Jesus, if he truly existed, which I believe he did, was a non-dualist, right? So a non-dualist would never make the world real. And let me break that down, what that means for you guys, just in case maybe this is the first time you're hearing it. Maybe many of you already understand this concept. But like, how if you talk to a Buddhist about intoxicants, they'll say, oh no, we never interact with intoxicants. Well, Buddha, a practicing non-dualist, would have never said objectively no to anything. Why? Because to think something is bad or not good makes the dream we're all in, which is not actually reality, it makes that dream more real, right? So Jesus and Buddha, they were connecting with many different things, but they also weren't falling into dependency. Because if you really understand non-dualism, it's all about the middle way, which is something good or bad? Probably in the middle, because good or bad implies duality. And we don't live in reality is not dualistic. This dream and how it appears is dualistic. But for any of you guys that have got too much into the good or bad, black or white, any of these kind of arguments, you realize that they get you farther into complexity, which is the world of the ego. Simplicity is the world of God, right? And so when I was reading these comments of these people putting through, Jesus is the only way. It's like, cool. So you believe we're all one? Yeah, of course. Then is cannabis not part of that one? Well, I mean, that's not what I said. It's like, no, that's actually kind of what you said, though, right? Because you said Jesus is the only way, as if he's an individual, right? God is in everything. So at the end of the day, a lot of people are not at the point to realize that they're still stuck in duality and they're not actually practicing non-dualism. I had a great conversation with Aaron Abke, one of my absolute gangster brothers in the world. Shout out to him. When I was in Austin for Danny's podcast, I always stay with Aaron and we have guys' nights and whatnot. And, his whole thing is with Christianity, right? He spent years in the church, right? Believing that he was a sinner, and all these things, and ended up having a Kundalini awakening and reorienting himself, leaving the church, etc. And the reason for that was not because he didn't believe in Jesus. It was because he realized that the Christian church may believe in Jesus, but they don't actually follow anything he said, right? So it's almost like he gave me an example where it's like, if Jesus came down to earth and he's like, hey, I want you to follow these 10 commandments. And people were like, well, we believe you, Jesus. We believe you. And he's like, cool, we'll actually do it. And they're like, no, we believe in you. You're the savior. He's like, I get that, but can you actually follow the things? No, we think you're the best thing that's ever happened. We totally believe in you. We even know you exist. It's like, cool. All that doesn't matter if you don't actually follow what I was saying, right? So when I look into the world, I see the many times that I've fallen into that. It's a almost constant ability to not identify with the dualistic world we've been trained to think is real, right? This is why, this is for me, the argument, if you will, for meditation, breath work, all these things. Because if you're like me, you probably like taking care of yourself. But if you're also like me, maybe you have the same challenge I had, where some of these things, meditation, breath work, I didn't really understand why I was doing them. I just knew I should be doing them because I was shoulding all over myself. And that's not going to make a healthy relationship with anything, right? It wasn't until I started to see behind the veil that I started to realize that meditation, breath work, all these things, right? Taking a walk in the woods, hanging out with your pet, any of these things that make you feel more connected to something bigger than you, what they're really looking to do is to allow you to realize slowly over time that everything here, everything we think is reality, is not actually reality. And psychedelics have been, in my opinion, the biggest catalyzer in my life for that. Now, again, does that mean that I went through these experiences and came out the other side perfectly non-dualistic? No, I'm still a human being, right? I can't be perfectly non-dualistic while I'm still identifying as a human being. But at the end of the day, what it did do, or what those experiences did do, is they illuminated. They showed me the back of the book, if you will, right? I think all of us have, been in the bookstore and just been like, what is this thing about? Let's read the back of the book, kind of get the giblets of it, right? And so what psychedelics did for me is they showed me what I was working towards. Before, I was just doing these things because I thought I should. But when I actually got to see behind the veil, I realized, oh, that's what I'm working towards? Now I know and have context for why I'm going to continue taking care of myself, why I'm going to continue meditating, why I'm not here to work a 9-to-5 and slave away at a job for 50 years just to hopefully collect Social Security, right? All these things made sense when I was able to have the direct experience of God. And I think one of the main challenges in the religious systems that are in the world today is that they have discounted the direct experience with Creator. They talk about scripture. They talk about all these books you should read, all these Sunday masses you should go to. And those things are great, right? Scripture's awesome. Sunday meetings are great at churches. All that's amazing. But if all of that is not including the direct experience of God, then it kind of just becomes a slave system of, oh my God, am I a good little boy or girl? Have I been fulfilling my responsibilities? If so, God loves me. If not, he hates me. That's humanness, right? Implying love and hate right there is dualistic. God could never love or hate because God is oneness. And that's what I'm trying to share with you guys of what I've experienced and how interesting it is to now navigate the world and go on big podcasts and see people comment these things, right? And in the past, I would get really triggered, right? I would go in there and try to discuss with them these things. But I started realizing, number one, I don't know everything. In their reality, if they're the creator of their reality and they think cannabis is bad, who am I to say that because they created that myth that cannabis was bad, that in their personal life, cannabis isn't bad? Maybe it is, right? All I know is in my life, it's very good. And that's why I keep connecting with it, because it keeps getting me closer to God. And on the back end, when I can integrate and do these things that I talk about often on the podcast, I get to hold those things. They don't just become fleeting memories in my past. They become my stationary, objective state of being. And again, it's not perfect by any means. I'll be the first to tell you, right? You can ask Rachel. I still get in arguments. I still get challenges. I go through all the things you guys go through. But the difference is that through my daily meditation practice, through breath work, through running my business, which I love, by connecting with psychedelics, all these things remind me a little bit more every day. Talking to you guys, right? Having you guys reach out and share with me your experience of these episodes that I release and the people that I bring onto the show. that helps me wake up too. You guys are a huge part of how I've continued to be able to wake up and self-actualize. And my hope and intention is that I am helping you do that too. Because I think the most beautiful rendition of humanity is that we all get to be mirrors for each other, and we all get to be God in drag in a way, right? We all get to play a fun experiment that God chose to have in a way of what if there was something else than oneness? I heard someone state recently that this world that we think we live in, someone asked something like, what is this, right? Like, what is this reality we live in and why is it here? And this gentleman answered in a very interesting answer. He was like, we are here to experience everything we truly are not. And that was very interesting to me because as soon as he said it, right off the bat, I was like, I don't know if that's true. And then I started ruminating and contemplating on it. And I was like, man, that's pretty interesting. Because here in this reality, quote unquote reality, we have a birth and a death. Dualistic. That's not us. We've never been born. We never die. We're infinite. Here we have What is up, family? I wanted to take a second while you're tuning in to tell you about an amazing new product I recently began using. Now, you guys know I do ads very rarely, and my promise to you is that anything I speak about is something I personally have found value in using regularly. Well, recently, I came across a company called Brain Supreme, who sells microdoses of mushrooms mixed with adaptogens, nootropics, and other additions as well. And even though I've microdosed off and on for years, I have never felt results like these. In only 2 weeks, I'm sleeping better, I have far less mind chatter, my ability to perform has exponentially improved, and best of all, the sense of inner peace I've been feeling is like nothing I've ever experienced in microdosing before. Right now, you can get 15% off of any of their products when you use code SPRAGUE15 at checkout. And to find out more about them and grab some for yourself, head down to the show notes for this episode and begin your journey into microdosing today. Now back to the show. Night and day, right? Black and white, good and bad, all these things. And the farther we believe the dream is real, the farther away we get from who we are. And let's talk for a second here about the idea of thirst traps, right? Now, you guys may have heard me talk about this before, but I don't just mean an attractive person. That is definitely one kind of thirst trap. But I mean all these things vying for our attention, right? Like even with the launch I have coming for Coach with Cannabis, there's been a lot of stuff happening very fast for that. I've been very excited. But some days I find myself getting aggravated. And then I get to forgive myself. I fell too much into the dream once again. I forgot to just have fun. I forgot that nothing I do matters, but it's very important I do it. I forgot that I'm already perfect. I forgot that I'm already perfectly loved and that we all are perfectly loved and we are all perfect, right? Because we're all God in drag. This is just what I believe, right? You guys don't need to agree with any of this. These are just my thoughts, right? These are things that I'm really wanting to share more in the show. You guys have probably heard me talk about a book called The Disappearance of the Universe. And I highly recommend if that name excites you or invigorates you, check it out. I'm very careful to recommend books, being in a very small position of influence. I realize that you guys may take things that I say work really well for me and be like, I'm going to go try it. And I think that's beautiful. It's amazing. But I want to make sure you guys always understand your sovereignty and realize the fact that things that work for me may not work for you. And I always want to share that because I never want anyone to think I have things figured out or that I have the perfect system. I don't. I'm just figuring out more and more things every day, like you guys are too. And so when I mention books or I mention podcasts to listen to or whatever, my best piece of wisdom here is if it excites you, if you're like, whoa, that sounds sick. Yeah, maybe you want to dive into it. If you're like, what was that thing he said? Probably not right for you. Maybe not right now. Maybe in the future, right? And I like to say that because there's a lot of people out there telling you, these are the 3 things to do if you want the best morning ritual. These are the 5 things to never do in business if you want to succeed. And I just think that stuff is silly, honestly. I imagine it comes from a good place of intention. But at the same time, we really don't know what's going to work for us based on what worked or didn't work for someone else. So my hope is that I get to open you up a little bit to wield the power of discernment in knowing whether or not something is actually for you. Because in my opinion, that's the one muscle we get to develop here, or maybe the most important one. I don't know if it's the only one, but it's the most important muscle. Because again, if we understand that God is infinite and the ego is finite, right? Then there's going to be a lot of things that the ego or God are going to pull us to. And discernment is our way of telling what is God and what is the ego. And it's not that God is good and the ego is bad. That's duality. Neither are good or bad. It's just that what is going to lead to more positive results over time? In my experience, it's siding with that higher power, God, etc. That doesn't mean the ego is useless. In my opinion, I think the ego is a beautiful tool, but it's a terrible pilot. It's a good co-pilot, terrible pilot. And most of us, because we were raised in an institutional system of school that's really meant to make factory workers, we were trained to only develop our ego. So I want you to picture the archetype of the guy that goes to the gym and only does arms and chest and back. Doesn't do legs, right? Skipped leg day. We all know that's a cardinal sin, right? And so that's kind of how I realized I was walking around. I'm like, man, I got this big upper body of ego, but my legs, God, is just completely undeveloped. And as a result of that, right, let's think about this gym analogy again. You know, it's great to have a sexy upper body or whatever it is, but is that as useful as the legs that you're going to stand on? Right. So that's kind of how I think about God versus the ego. It's like, yeah, we're in a game, like play the game, have fun being the individual that is Ryan or whoever you are. Right. But don't do that if you forget about what you really are, because then you're just going to feel separated and you're going to try to find connection through a lot of ways that are probably not going to pan out that well. Addiction, pornography, bad food, all these kind of things, right? Drugs, even tobacco, cannabis, etc. Right. So again, at the end of the day, that's why I choose to meditate. That's why I choose to do breath work now, because I realize those things help me continue to make sure my legs are my strongest asset, right? And then I just get to have fun with my upper body. You guys have realized at this point, I'm sure, that I love analogies. They're my love language. They're how I talk to Creator. And so hopefully that one lands for you guys. Now, real quickly, I wanted to go through some of my favorite moments on the show, because it feels like yesterday, even though it was 2021, that I did this first episode. And here we are, January 23rd, 2025, and I'm at episode 200, right? Well, it's actually going to get released tomorrow, but you guys get to hear it from the past. And so at the end of the day, you know, the first thing that pops into my mind is one of the first conversations I had on this podcast anyway with my good buddy, Jason Ganzuk. This guy is one of those people that soul brother in my life. I met this guy through Paul Chek. I was at the shamanic sound healing workshop. Actually, no, it was the mandala workshop back in 2021. And, you know, of course, when I got there, Paul's like, get everyone really high for the painting. I'm like, Roger, on it. And so I get everyone nice and bagged up on the volcano. And it was actually really funny. My buddy Eddie, who was the first episode ever on my last podcast, Highly Optimized. If you haven't checked that out, definitely go check that out. Realize how far I've come. For any of you guys that want to start your own podcast, don't ever for a second think that I felt this comfortable on camera all the time. Go back and listen to that episode and you'll realize how far I've come and how silly I was back then. But again, right? Like, you know, just to go on a quick side tangent, those who mind don't matter. Those who matter don't mind, right? So all my fears of what if someone thinks I'm stupid? What if I mess up my speech? Well, the people that judge me on that weren't meant to be my people anyway. So we have everything to gain by doing what our heart wants and nothing to lose by doing it, in my opinion, right? So anyway, back to the Paul Chek story. So I'm at the mandala workshop, getting everyone nice and bagged up. I'm there with Eddie Madden. We have dueling volcanoes. It was a big class. It was like 60 people. And for anyone who hasn't been to the mandala workshop, it's my favorite workshop Paul runs. It's so beautiful. The first day, it's a 2-day workshop. First of all, for anyone that doesn't know, these workshops are at Paul's personal house. You're hanging out with his family. You get to use his cold plunge. You get to use his sauna. It's incredible. I honestly think they are a hidden secret, you know, because it's just, you get to go hang out with a living legend. I mean, a guy that is a straight anomaly. So anyway, we're there and I have the volcano on the left side of the room. Eddie's got the one on the right. So funny. I remember he brought this party bag that was like 4 feet long. So like as we're blowing it and we're passing it, you know, people are sitting in rows, like the bag's going over people's heads and stuff. It was a pretty hilarious sight. And so I see this guy standing there looking very zen, just standing there, hanging out. And I'm asking everyone if they want bags. So I run up to him and I'm like, hey man, you want a bag? He's like, yes, I would. Thank you. And so we get to talking and I'm just like, dude, this guy's awesome. Like, who is this guy? So we start hanging out and we start connecting. And I realized this guy is a straight savant genius. You know, it's funny, actually, my producer for the show, shout out to Shlomo. Some of you guys may have met him before. I'm sure you have, times that I've been out, you know, with him doing podcast tours and whatnot. But it was funny. The first interview I ever had with Jason, he like calls me. He's like, hey, dude, what's up with this guest? And I'm like, oh, Jason, he's the man. Like, what's wrong? And he's like, no, nothing's wrong. Like, that's the issue. Like, nothing is wrong. Like, this guy didn't say one one ah. His track didn't need to be edited a second. He's like, I've never seen that in my history of podcasting. So that should tell you how exquisitely articulate and intelligent this guy is and how beautiful of a human being he is. He's just a beautiful soul. And I remember just how much he catalyzed in me because he's been doing an HTMA protocol with me for about 18 months now. HTMA stands for hair tissue mineral analysis. And he blew my fucking mind with this idea of not only everything starting at the mineral level, but being able to look at these charts and not just see, hey, you have too much calcium, bring that down. You have too much copper, bring that down. Like, that's the very left brain way to read these charts. How he did it was incredible. He actually is able to look at these things and not only figure out how to bring them down, but he will share with you, because let's say calcium's high, he will share with you that you're probably not able to express certain emotions, right? Sadness, anger, etc. And he explains this as there's a calcium shell inside of you. And when that shell starts to break, all of a sudden you have emotions start coming out. So let's just think for a second, how many people think they can't cry and something's wrong with them, so they go get put on medication, when in reality, it's probably to do with the fact that our world is ridiculously toxic. And we have these buildups of excess minerals because our bodies can't detox them a lot of the time because we have toxic load, we don't have good lymph drainage. So again, like when he was opening this up to me, I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Like, you guys ever get that like feeling where you hear something, you're just like, yep, I know that to be true. I know that to be true. I have no idea why. I don't know anything about this subject, but I just know that instinctively to be true. Like, you feel it right here, right in the center of your heart. That was exactly what it was. And so I signed on with him to do that. And it's been absolutely life-changing. And really cool thing is, my favorite relationships are the ones where we expand each other. And so he expanded me a lot through that. And about 6 months after I met him, maybe a year after, I joined Jay Griff's community, the Level Up Collective. Maybe some of you have heard that guy. He is a stud. I love that guy. Shout out to Jay Griff. I started seeing his content on Instagram, and he's just a rad dude, like talking about sovereignty, taxes are voluntary. I'm like, dude, hell yes, bro. Where do I sign up, right? So I was watching his stuff and, really thinking about the fact that I really wanted to learn more about investing and how to play this game of generational wealth. Because I had done a couple things. I started my own business. I wasn't working in the 9-to-5, but I was like, I still don't want to have to think about being on sales calls all the time and like constantly churning this machine. Because when I looked at millionaires and billionaires that I had met, they weren't doing that, right? So I realized, okay, I got to a 6-figure mindset in a certain way, just thugging it out, more coffee, just go, go, go. But that was not going to be sustainable, number one. And it wasn't going to be what continued to get me forward in the 7 and 8 figures or anything and beyond. And so I end up seeing his content. I feel that fuck yes. I end up signing up and I get in there and I start learning all of what he's teaching, which he's teaching a lot about sovereignty, basically his path. And basically his path is you leverage your credit score to get funding through credit cards. And then you use those credit cards, you offboard the money and you put it into crypto. Because when I was in his group, like the bull run was a year around from starting. Now we're currently like potentially in it already. I don't think it's really started yet, but it's kind of up for debate. And so I was like, wow, this seems really cool. And so I ended up telling Jason about it when we were on a call for my HTMA stuff. And I'm like, dude, I know you're like me. We're pirates. We want to do life very differently than most people. So I told him about it. And he ends up signing up and he falls in love with it just like I did. And it was funny because about a year later, I took my leave from Jay Griff's community. I learned everything I could. And I was still struggling with some crypto stuff. And I just, my brain is not really a math and science type brain. I can do it. But that kind of stuff, I need my hand held a little more. Where when it comes to psychedelics, I can just eat some mushrooms and figure it out on the go. So we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And so I ended up meeting Amethyst, who you guys have heard on the show, fast soul brother of mine as well. And I ended up meeting him and I loved his vibe. We started a free sovereignty group, me and Alex, who you've also heard on the show, Alex Morningstar, called the Mighty Morphin Sovereign Rangers with Brandon Thomas, also, who you've heard on the show, and Brandon Joe Williams, who you've had on the show, and Bree Divine, and probably a couple other people I'm forgetting as well. And we started that group because we were all like, yo, this is like a mess of shit out there. Let's try to figure out, like, if we're going to try to get out of taxes and do this stuff, let's all work together to figure this shit out. Because when you're out there hearing like you can get a free car through using a 1099-C, you can discharge your student loans, you can discharge credit cards, you never have to pay them back, you can get infinite money through your trust. Like these are insane shiny objects. And I want you guys to understand, if you ever want to get into that realm, just realize it's very easy for it to take over your entire life. Because you're talking about generational wealth where no one in your lineage will ever have to work again. Like that is a very shiny object. And that is possible, but it's not nearly as easy as anyone out there is going to make it seem. Jay Griff is the only one that, to me, was really honest about it. Joe Lustica as well. Shout out to those guys. Brandon Joe Williams, too. He's really good at this stuff. But there's a lot of people out there that make this seem like, oh, it's just easy. You just fill out a form, you send it in, you're done. Promise you guys, it is not like that, okay? If I could show you the amount of certified mail receipts I have, letters from different, organizations and whatnot coming back in, it's a lot, right? So I end up joining Amethyst's container, his accelerator container for crypto. And I tell Jason about it. He gets in there. A couple of my students from the CCC get in there. Shout out to Sheev, shout out to Milan, some other really cool people too. And we start diving in. And Jason takes such a liking to it that he ends up quitting his coaching practice temporarily because he was just getting burned out. I can definitely identify with that because it happens. You're taking on people's weight all day, every day. And so he goes to Costa Rica and starts trading meme coins, ends up hitting big. I won't release the numbers, but it was just that moment where he was like, dude, like, thank you. Like, I would have never known about this if it weren't for you. And I'm like, dude, thank you. Like, I would have never felt this good and had access to all my emotions and all these things if it weren't for what you taught me with HTMA. And so that was one of my favorite moments in the show. It's just like, ultimately, if I had to boil it down, it's the friendships I've made along the way. Because to me, that's everything for me. Like, I seriously only live on this planet to bring people together and to have a lot of fun. And sometimes that fun is crying. Sometimes it's very hard times, right? But if we have each other, we have everything we need. And that's why you guys will hear me talk about the Conscious Cannabis Collective, the Coach with Cannabis, the Inner Circle, Breathe with Cannabis, all these things I do. It's not just to make massive money and any of that kind of stuff you see online. It's because I really want to bring people together. I have a natural knack for what I call platonic matchmaking, right? We all have our strengths and weaknesses in the world, and that's randomly one of the ones I got. And so I can just tell, like, ooh, that person's going to really get along with that person. And then watching it happen, like watching Jason and Amethyst hit it off, or Sheev, Milan, anyone I've introduced to Amethyst, or anyone I've introduced to Jason, it's so fulfilling and rewarding for me. If I woke up tomorrow with generational wealth, that's what I would do with the rest of my life. It's just play platonic matchmaker and be like, oh my God, you need to know this person. I mean, honestly, I would keep doing exactly what I'm doing, which is a good thing to know. If I woke up tomorrow with $100 million, I ask myself this often, what would change in my life? Because if you ever think you're on path and then you think about never having to worry about money again, and then you think about what you would do, it might be a very different answer. But recently I thought about I'd literally keep doing the same things I'm doing, which is a great, great feeling to have. And you guys are a big part of why I can feel that way, because you guys tune in every week and listen to me and tune into the guests and everything. One of the other conversations that sticks out to me is episode 100, Robert Forte. I was actually going to have him as episode 200, but it was totally my fault. I forgot that episode 200 was this week until 4 nights ago. And he's living in Greece right now, having the time of his life. So I reached out to him Tuesday night, which is probably Wednesday morning his time. And I'm like, hey, dude, can you do episode 200 with me this Thursday? He's like, how about next Thursday? I was like, all right, it'll be episode 201. So watch out for that interview because it's going to be great. But, for anyone who hasn't heard that interview, or for anyone that has too, Robert is such an amazing guy. And he's so humble with being literally one of the pioneers of the psychedelic industry and the psychedelic world we know today. I'll tell you guys a quick story of how I met Robert. So when I went on Aubrey Marcus's podcast, I met Ben Stewart, who a lot of you guys probably know made Psychedelica and I believe Limitless on Gaia. Amazing videographer. He directed Aubrey's Darkness Retreat and a couple other things Aubrey's done. And just a great guy. We hit it off right away. I had him on the show. It's got to be back around episode 70 or 80. But he told a great story about meeting mantid beings while on ayahuasca with Aubrey and the whole crew down at, I believe, Rhythmia. And so he hit me up one day and he was like, hey, I have 2 really good friends that just moved back to your area because I'm in Boston. And I was like, dude, please tell me, because I'm out here with a life raft, SOS. Who else here is like me? Besides Eddie Madden and my girlfriend, Rachel, and a couple other people we hang out with around here. Because when I go to Austin, Texas, or San Diego, I got hundreds of friends down there that are all into this stuff. But here in Boston, it's been a little hard to find that same type of community when it comes to psychedelics, spirituality, things like that. So he tells me about them, and their names are Madhava, who I'm going to get on soon, and Jill. So I go up to Carlisle, Massachusetts, where they're at, and we hang out and we have a great time. And it was so funny. I mean, we get there and we're all having a great conversation. And Madhava just stops us and he's like, wait a minute. You guys know that 9/11 was a hoax, right? And we're like, of course, dude. I was like, I watched Zeitgeist when I was 16 smoking weed. He was like, all right, sick, they're in, right? Because again, that was a really sketchy time, right? You had to like kind of go around like, do you realize we're in a gigantic psyop right now called COVID, or do you actually trust the science, right? Remember that time? Very awkward for any of us that had eyes to see. Once he said that, I was like, okay, you guys are my people, because we can talk about it. And at the end of the day, I don't care if people believe that wasn't a psyop, just as long as you don't get insanely triggered around it. It's like, listen, I don't need to argue my point. You don't need to argue your point. We can agree to disagree. But when we find people that resonate with that kind of stuff, especially for me as a spiritual seeker, I jump hard at that. And so we hang out, we have a great time. And about a month later, Madhavi hits me up and he's like, hey, I'm having some friends over that I think you'd really enjoy meeting. You should come over. So I asked Rachel, I'm like, you want to come? And she had something going on. So I just like, screw it. I'll cruise up there alone. So it was in the summer. I packed my Volcano up and I go up there, of course, plenty of cannabis for research and scientific purposes. And I go up there and I get there and I get out of my car and I walk around the back because I could tell there's some people hanging out in the back. And Madhava's cooking on the grill. Go behind him. I'm like, hey, buddy, what's going on? He's like, oh, you made it. Sick. And he's like, hey, my buddy Robert's inside. You should go meet him. I'm like, all right, cool. So I head inside and I see Jill and I meet some other friends and I meet Robert. We're kind of hanging around doing small talk. And I'm like, well, hey, I'm going to go in the other room and set up the Volcano. And he's like, can I come with you? I'm like, yeah, dude, let's go. Usually my best friends are the ones that are like, let's set up the Volcano and just talk, right? It's my favorite stuff is bag sessions. And so we go in there and we start blowing bags. And I'm like, dude, so tell me about yourself, man. Like, who are you? How do you know Jill and Madhava? And this guy, he's like, we met a long time ago. I have an interesting past. And he's being very vague about it. And I'm like, well, dude, tell me about it, right? He's like, well, my life changed forever when I tried MDMA for the first time in the early 80s with Alexander Shulgin. And I'm like, isn't that the guy that invented MDMA? He's like, yeah, I was one of the first people to try it at the Esalen Institute way back then. And I'm like, dude, immediately I'm like, you have my curiosity. I'm like, how did you get into that crew? Like, what was this all like? He's like, well, I was really good friends with Timothy Leary. And then he starts dropping, I was friends with Terence McKenna and Dennis McKenna and Aldous Huxley and Albert Hoffman and all these people. And I'm just like, wait a minute. So you were friends with the guy that invented LSD or found it. You were friends with the guy that found MDMA. You were friends with Terence and Dennis McKenna. You were friends with Timothy Leary. I'm like, who the fuck are you, dude? And basically what came out of that was realizing he was all of them, but just decided to get no attention for it. Just didn't want all the stuff along with it. And so immediately we became fast friends because we're both insane spiritual seekers. And this guy, for being in his mid-60s, I think he's around there, has one of the most youthful spirits I've ever encountered in my life. He told me this hilarious story. I think he told it on the show too, but he told me the story of being in Kauai in like the mid-80s. And in Kauai, there was a certain part in Kauai that was like very like a hippie village, basically, right on the beach. And so him and a friend decided to drop a bunch of acid and go on this hike that took like, I think 4 hours to get to this little hippie commune. So they go on this hike, they get there and they decide to go swimming. And they were going to swim from one island to another. Now, I'm not talking like from one big island of Hawaii to another. It was like a small, little piece of land, but still a pretty far swim. And so Robert was a little like, oh, I don't know about this, but okay, fine, let's do it. And so they start swimming and he just gets washed out to shore. Washed out to sea. And he's just trying to paddle against the current, just keep getting more and more out, right? And he's tripping balls and he's like, oh my God, I'm going to die out here. And he's like, Ryan, I shit you not. All of a sudden a ship just comes out of nowhere like a boat. He's like, hey, you need a ride? Picks him up and drops him off the island. And he's like, what the fuck was that? I almost just died, right? And he's just chock full of stories like that. And those are my favorite kind of people that I can tell really lived, There's that Hunter S. Thompson quote that I'll probably butcher, but I'll get the giblets of it, which is basically the point of life is not to arrive at your coffin with a perfectly pristine body. It's to slide in sideways yelling, what a fucking ride. And when I meet people like Robert, that's who I take inspiration from. Because for me, I realize I'm only in this individual meat suit once, right? I'm an infinite being, but I get to play this expression once. And I really don't want to leave any songs unsung. I want to leave no gas in the gas tank. I want to go out full throttle, having the best time, feeling the most emotion, whether it's desirable emotions, undesirable. I want to feel all of it. I want to experience all of it. And so when I meet people that are essentially ethereal extreme sporters to me, I take a lot of inspiration from people like that. So I thought you guys would enjoy those couple moments that really allowed me to see. I mean, every episode does this, but those episodes were like, wow, I am exactly where I'm meant to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing. And you guys probably have noticed this is only the second solo cast I've ever done. You know, there's a big part of me being a projector in human design, and many of you guys may know what that is. If you haven't, go look up a free human design chart. Go look up a free human design chart on Jovian Archive and nerd out on that for a while. It's going to blow your goddamn mind. But as a projector, my strategy for life is to wait for the invitation. And so sometimes if I'm doing a solo cast, I'm like, what's the invitation? Right? Like there's no question getting asked. So, you know, it was funny when I was thinking about episode 200, I was like, you know, a lot of you guys have reached out over and over being like, I want to know more about your story. I want to know more about your story. And I've been like, I don't want to make the podcast about me, but it is partly about me, right? I started it, you know, so it only feels right to let you guys into my silly world every once in a while. And I thought no better opportunity than episode 200 to do that. And it's been really interesting and amazing and challenging and all the things, putting myself out there. You know, like the things that people don't really warn you about in my experience. And it's maybe not that they don't warn you about it, but you can't really expect what it's going to do before it does it. It wasn't until I went on Aubrey Marcus. You know, before that, I'd been on Paul's podcast. I've been on some bigger ones, but they were kind of like, you know, just little bumps. Like, oh, cool. I got like, you know, 20 new followers or got like 20 leads or whatever. Awesome. When I went on Aubrey, I gained, I don't know, 12,000 followers in like a 3-week period. I got my call calendar booked out for 6 months within the first 10 days. And it broke every system in my business. But not only that, it also put a big spotlight on me. And when that happened, and I went to go look at the comments, 90% of them were really nice. But I'll tell you, when you see people talking shit, no matter how strong you think you are, when you are getting on a podcast that gets millions of views and things like that, oh man, it can definitely give you the heebie-jeebies. And it definitely did for me. But I'm very grateful for it because it allowed me to see a lot of my own belief systems. Because ultimately, let's just be honest here, right? If someone calls me an asshole and I don't believe I'm an asshole, it doesn't affect me. But if someone calls me an asshole and deep down somewhere unconscious, I kind of feel like I'm an asshole, I'm probably going to get triggered and call them an asshole for calling me an asshole and try to deflect and project onto them because really I just feel this unconscious guilt of like, oh shit, they see me. They see who I think I am, right? So if you ever think you're spiritually evolved, go on a big platform and read the comments because they are gifts in disguise. And so that's why when I talked about Danny Morrell back a little while ago, I realized a long time ago, it's not my place, nor is it my responsibility to try to have arguments with people online, you know, because at the end of the day, if they don't like me, they don't like me. Their opinion of me is no business of mine. And honestly, at the end of the day, you know, one of my favorite parts of Disappearance of the Universe was when Gary, the author, was starting to go actually teach A Course in Miracles in like big areas, right? Like big stages, things like that. And he was talking to one of his mentors and he was asking him, he said, you know, what do I do about all these people that think I'm a fraud? And his mentor said, listen, Gary, there's 2 types of people. There's your people and not your people. Why would you ever spend time that you could otherwise spend with your people trying to convince not your people to be your people, right? It's silly when we say it out like that. But I realized I was in my own state of that. So it's been very interesting putting myself out there, letting myself be heard, letting myself be seen, and just seeing what happens, you know, fucking around, finding out. You know, and that's been an insane spiritual catalyzer for me. Crypto's been another one. When the charts are up, oh, life is amazing. What happens if you lose 10 grand in the day? How good can you keep yourself regulated then, right? How good can you have faith that it's going to go back up? Can you not panic sell and run in the fear and let fear take over? You know, again, like this is why, like, as I've done these things that I enjoy, podcasting, you know, coaching, all these things, I've started to realize that they're all spiritual catalyzers. I mean, everything in life is, right? Even if you work and own a hot dog stand, it's a spiritual catalyzer. Anything you decide to go do with your beingness is going to be a spiritual catalyzer. But what I found is that the ones that get a lot of people looking at you at once, oh man, they can be insane spiritual catalyzers. And again, I'm very similar to probably a lot of you, right? Like I always wanted more out of life, but I didn't know how to do it. I played small. And so when I found the courage to go out and start highly optimized and do these things, I didn't know. I thought, I'm perfect now, right? Which is so silly to think, right? But I was like, I've gone through these things. I know who I am. I won't get offended when people say negative things about me. And there I am trying to argue with people in the comments. And Rachel was one of the people that was like, you don't have to do that, right? And I'm like, no, I do. And then I remember one day a random person reached out to me on Instagram and was like, hey, man, I just see that you're trying to prove yourself in your comments. Like, you don't need to do that. And that's when I realized, wow, everyone sees this except me. So what another amazing opportunity to realize where I fell into the complexity of the ego, to bring it back to what we were talking about a little while ago, where I believed in the dream that is me, the individual. It's called Ryan, and how I can't, people can't say bad things about me. They're not true. I want to argue and stick up for myself. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Because again, at the end of the day, if I understand how hard my mind is to change, if I'm set on something, why am I projecting onto another person like I can change their mind? That's just an ego thought, right? At the end of the day, the only thing that's going to change someone's mind is them changing it. And if they don't like me, there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe there's something about me they don't like. I don't know, right? I had to get over the ego belief that if someone, says something bad about me, they just don't know who I am. So I gotta tell them who I am. No, I don't, right? Because what they're saying about me is just a reflection of how they think about themselves. And that's why I love Hermetic law, because the law of correspondence states, as within, so without. So if someone says to me, Ryan, you're an asshole, it's really because they think they're an asshole, but they don't want to take accountability for it. So they're going to project it onto me. And if I fall into that because I think I'm an asshole, then I'm going to get back in their face and be like, no, you're the asshole. And this is how most of the world is stuck on these ridiculous arguments like Trump versus Biden, all these things. It's just so silly. They're just divisive strategies to keep us at odds with each other, to keep us thinking that we have more differences than similarities. When the last I checked, we're all human beings here. No matter what color of skin, no matter what our age, no matter what our ethnicity, we're all human beings. And the powers that shouldn't be don't want you to realize that. God wants you to realize that. So again, right, God is simplicity. Now when someone reaches out and they say something negative, I just say, hey, it looks like I'm not the right person for you. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, feel free to unfollow and move along. And I'm not doing it from a sarcastic, like, I'm not fazed by what you say, because I did that in the past, right? Now it's literally like, hey, man, life is finite, right? This reality we're in is finite, this dream. Go find the people that are right for you. If it's not me, there's millions of other people out there. Billions. No harm, no foul, right? Plus, can you imagine being liked by everyone? That would be really exhausting. But at one point in my life, I thought that was the point of life, right? So it's been interesting putting myself out there, to say the least. Now, one of the things I want to talk about too is how important it is. This is one of the things I found out over the past 4 years. It's one of the things I knew a long time before that, but I didn't realize it. I didn't make it real for the I in the equation. And that is how important our why is, right? Simon Sinek has a book, It Starts with Why, or Start with Why, something like that. And when it comes to everything that I currently do in my life, there's a lot of output sometimes, especially when I'm launching a program like I am now. And then I realize, oh my God, episode 200 is coming up. Oh shit, right? And there's going to be a lot of moments like that as you open up to more of who and what you truly are, and you have a why, right? You're going to find more things and more things and more things that you could do. And me being a kid at heart, I want to say yes to all these things. But at the same time, first of all, you can't say yes to anything, or you can't say yes to everything, because until you learn to say no, your yes has no power, first of all. But number two, you got to make sure that you have the energy to handle it, because I'll tell you what will happen. Our why supplies us with the context of why we're going to go put ourselves in otherwise very uncomfortable situations, right? Like me putting myself out there, things like that, like I already talked about. There's only so much energy we have, right? And so at the end of the day, no matter how deep your why is, which is extremely important to have, you got to be aware of what your natural energy is. And one of the big challenges I've worked through in this past year has been not pushing buttons to get more energy. So for a long time, I was off stimulants completely for like 10 years, right? No caffeine, no nicotine, nothing. And then when I started my business and Rachel and I moved in together and I bought her an espresso machine, and I love espresso, I started being like, well, she's having one, I'll have one, right? And what started happening was, because I was ramping my energy up every day, I was only having a double shot. It wasn't like I was drinking 8 cups, but still for me, I already have such a high spun nervous system. And I found that out through HTMA testing, that for me, having 1 cup of coffee is like I'm bouncing off the walls, right? And so basically what happened was I started saying yes to too many things because I had an accelerated energy that wasn't natural. And so what would happen would be I'd be in this super high vibe state, caffeinated, and someone would say something. I'd be like, oh, of course, I'll get it done by tomorrow. And then I wake up the next day and I feel like I took a detrimental effect from yesterday because I burned some of tomorrow's energy yesterday. And I wake up and I'm like, oh shit, I got to do all the stuff I was going to do and that thing. Okay, better drink more coffee. And you can see how this rigmarole happens, right? Eventually, I woke up to the fact of like, oh shit, I'm in a very anxious fight or flight nervous system state. And I've also been saying yes to things that I don't really have the energy for, and then feeling bad when I don't have the energy. So I've been trying to get the energy. And fortunately for me, I'm a very healthy person. So I never, kind of did things that were really out of alignment, like cocaine or any of the crazy shit that other people do. But at the same time, because I'm a highly optimized individual and I'm tuned into my subtle layers, it was when I started meditating a lot more, when I started adding another 45 minutes in about 8 months ago to every day I'm in meditation, that I started realizing, oh shit, Ryan, you have a nervous system challenge right now. You have ramped yourself up from all the dopamine of getting on podcasts and all these things, that you've had this unnatural amount of energy and you've kind of shot yourself in the foot many times trying to keep up with that every day. And so about a year ago, I went through a pretty big dark night of the soul and realized that the strategies that I'd learned for business, I didn't care how much they worked. I didn't care if they were the only way to do it. I wasn't going to do it anymore. I was burned out. And that was when I met a gentleman by the name of Ani Manian, who I just had on the show recently. He's now my business coach and a great friend of mine. I met him actually 2 years ago, and I got banned from Turo when I hung out with him. That's a funny story that I'll tell real quick. So I used to rent cars off Turo when I went on trips, and this was the Aubrey trip. So I did Josh Trent's podcast, which is Wellness and Wisdom. Then I did Aubrey's the next day. Then I did Cal Callahan's the next day. And then I did Amy Edwards the next day. So it was like a big trip. I brought Shlomo with me. Rachel was with me. And we rented a car off Turo. I rented like a Kia, like something like that. And I could tell right away this owner was going to be a little bit problematic because she was like freaking out, like, make sure that you do these things to Sangria. She named her car Sangria, which again, I'm a car guy. I name cars, but I was like, holy shit, this is a little much for a Kia, but okay, no judgment. And we went on the hike. I had just met Ani, so I messaged him like, let's meet up. So we go on a hike. And when we get to the place we were going to hike, we rolled a joint in the car. And I'm not stupid enough to smoke joints in cars because only get away with what you can get away with, right? But I dropped a couple specks of cannabis on the seat. Like I'm talking like, if you guys can see this on camera, like microscopic, like you could barely see them with the naked eye. And so when I dropped the car off, I get this message from the owner and she's like, I can't believe how much you disrespected Sangria. Look at this. And she sends me a picture and I like zoom in. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I like zoom in hard enough and I'm like, oh, there's a couple like, little things of cannabis there. And I'm like, and she's like, yeah, you smoked in the car. I'm like, no, I didn't. I didn't smoke in the car. Do you not know the smell of burned versus unburned cannabis? And she sends back, she's like, oh yeah, you're right. I realized you didn't smoke in the car, but could you still pay me an extra cleaning fee? So I decided to be a wise ass and I text back and I'm like, do those specs not get sucked up in the vacuum that you use after everyone rents your car anyway? ? And then she reported me to Turo and I got banned. So anyway, that's where I met Ani, to give you context. So when I reached out to him, about a year ago, the first question he asked me was, Ryan, what do you want your life to look like? And it was that moment that I realized, fuck, I forgot to ask myself that. When I got into business, I knew nothing about business, right? That was the story I had running. And you guys will see that wasn't exactly true. But I thought I knew nothing about business. I had never run an online business. I didn't know how to use Kajabi. I didn't know how to use Zoom. I didn't know how to, make calls or build courses or do certifications or any of this stuff. So what I did was when I started my business and I started to realize I was going to make a cannabis program, I just came right from the heart and I made Connect with Cannabis. I didn't do market research. I didn't see what the market was looking for. I just made this thing that I was really excited about. And then I get on Check's podcast. He loves the idea of the program, starts blowing up. And then I start talking to people, business coaches, and they're like, well, did you do market research before you built this program? I'm like, no, what do you mean market research? I didn't know I was supposed to. Like, well, how do you even know that your market wants this? Who's your ideal client avatar? What's your niche? All these things, right? Now, I'm not saying these things are useless, but in a way they are. And I'll tell you why. Because then I started realizing, oh my God, I didn't do any of this stuff. And I started shifting a lot of things in the program, right, to fit my target market. And what ended up happening was I ended up hating what I built, even though that was the strategy to make massive money and do all these things, right? I ended up being on sales calls all the fucking time. I didn't want to do that. But everyone told me, no, you have to be the one that does it. You just have to be the one that does it. I'm like, okay, I guess that's just what I have to do. Okay, if that's what I have to do, all right, I'll do it. And what ended up happening was I was building up resentment over time. And then what started happening was I started to not feel the energy I once had. So I started hitting the stimulants, like I already explained. And then I started saying yes to too much. And before I knew it, I was super overwhelmed, especially when that episode with Aubrey went live, because all of a sudden, I mean, you want to feel a dopamine hit, get about 180 sales calls booked in a 2-week period. That will give you a dopamine hit. And so I was like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. But what I started realizing was that system was clunky as fuck. Because no one I had worked with had hit a big podcast like that, they didn't really know what was going to happen when that happened. They had some really good advice for, like, if you're just a normal person online, just doing stuff and you're getting maybe like 2 leads a week, hop on sales calls with them, no big deal, right? A couple calls a week. What happens when me, someone who wants to teach cannabis and teach how to grow in these things, all of a sudden becomes a glorified sales agent? I'm just on sales calls 40 hours a week. Well, you start not liking what you're doing. And so when I met Ani and he asked, what do I want my life to look like? All of a sudden I realized, I was like, I don't want it to look anything like it looks right now. I don't want to be on fucking sales calls every day. I don't want to be doing these gigantic launches. I don't want to be doing any of this stuff. And he's like, yeah, you want a business that fits you. I was like, yeah. And then getting into his program, the first thing he says is, don't go out there and do market research and these kind of things. Build something from your heart and then figure out where it fits in. But don't change yourself to fit the market. Because did Jimi Hendrix go out and listen to what other people were doing to figure out what he wanted to do? No, he came out with a very unique style that changed the entire world. And so what I didn't realize way back when I first started my business is that I actually understood the most important part of business, which is your heart's got to be in it. And you got to do what you really love to do. And if you don't do that, what's the point of any of this? Right? Cool, you make money. Yeah, you're probably just going to spend it faster because you're so miserable, right? Like nothing matters if your heart's not in it. And so I've spent the last year reorganizing everything in my business, making my time a lot more valuable, not doing sales calls anymore, knowing full well that if someone looks at my private invitations and they say no, they're not the right person for it. It's okay. There's 8 billion people on the planet. The right people will find it at the right time. And that's perfect. And that's now how I've led the Inner Circle, the Conscious Cannabis Collective, my newest venture, that you guys will actually have first access to join the waitlist if you go down to the show notes of this episode for Coach with Cannabis. Now, I've done a certification before, but I've spent the last 6 months revamping this thing and putting so much life in it, and also teaming up with my co-facilitator, Shelly DeMarco, who you guys have also heard on the podcast, who's been a psychedelic aid and ally and guide for over 15 years. She does some incredible stuff, 5-MeO DMT work with veterans, and she had gone through Connect with Cannabis way back when it was my original program, and she had loved it. And I remember when she said she loved it, I was like, oh my God, are you sure? I didn't do market research or any of this stuff. She's like, I love this. Like, this is very unique. And she's taken pretty much every program out there. So her and I have worked very diligently and very passionately to put this together. And this is the first time we're going to open doors to this. And it's an ongoing community. It's a really, really fun thing that I feel like is all my life's work coming together now, because we have basically, you can get certified in as little as 6 months. And after that, you can continue to join the community and stay in and receive coaching and mastery and business support. You can then become part of a registered coaches network, where I'm going to be helping people get on big podcasts and helping them form joint venture partnerships and all these things that I've now found are the secret sauce, right? Like, why do I need to go on social media and try to fight with an algorithm that for some reason actually believes that plants are good on one imaginary line but not another, when I can just leverage joint venture partnerships like Danny Morel or Aubrey Marcus and leverage their marketing machine, make them an affiliate so they get some side passive income, and boom, now I got 2 million eyes on me and I didn't have to be a slave to social media, right? So I've started to realize that part of my mission is now starting to help people create businesses that are not based on logic anymore. They're based on feeling of, like, you guys know those commercials where it's like a faucet and it's like, build a house around this, right? And the kind of like idea of that is like, that's ridiculous. But no, if you really love that faucet and it gives you a vision for your house, then why shouldn't your whole house be built around one faucet? Why, right? Why do we think that it needs to be done any other way? So for me, what my next evolution is is not only helping people learn how to coach with cannabis, but also helping them in how to create a business that is really fit for their individual needs. Because as AI gets bigger, the coaching industry is going to get wrecked. And the only thing that is going to last are people, people's energy, their uniqueness, their unique magic and what they create. And so it's been really amazing to go through this journey with you guys and, evolve and fall down, get myself back up, lick my wounds and keep going. And I wanted to do this show today because I'm very grateful. One of the things that I think about most often is just what my life would look like if it weren't for all these things I'm doing right now. There was a time in my life where I didn't know if I was ever going to get up and go. I honestly didn't know. I knew I had a lot of songs unsung within me, but I had a lot of fear. And so for any of you that are out there listening to this show, that are like me back in 2018, 2019, knowing full well that you have so much love to give the world, knowing that you want to help, but just not knowing how, if you get clear on your why, right? You get clear on why you want to do these things, you get clear on why they matter to you, and you get clear on really what's going to happen when they happen, right? Your vision. And then you just take one small step every day. I'm nothing special, guys. You can get anywhere you want. That's like if I had to boil down everything that I want to share with the world, beneath cannabis, beneath business, beneath anything, it's you can do anything. And hopefully I can be proof for you guys. Like I said, I'm no one special. I wasn't born with a shit ton of money. I wasn't born knowing how to put myself out there. I mean, fuck, you guys have heard my story. I literally suffered with anxiety for a lot of my life until I realized that anxiety was just a story. But I only learned that because I followed a cue to get into coaching, and I followed the cue to start my own business and find the people that could support me through that. And realizing that all of them had this too, right? I had a story of I'm the only one. No, we all have experiences of anxiety. We all have experiences of depression. We all have experiences of happiness, right? These are not conditions. They're just part of the human experience. And so at the end of the day, I love you guys. I am so grateful for each and every one of you that continues to tune in every week, that hits me up on Instagram, that asks me questions, that comes to get-togethers with me. You guys have made my life so much more exciting, so much more meaningful, so much more full of purpose, and so much more fucking fun. And that's what I'm here for, guys. I'm here to help you guys find out how to live the most fun life possible. And so for any of you guys that feel like Coach with Cannabis is your next level of fun, you can find that in the show notes. I would love to see you guys in there. My invitation with these things and the things I mentioned in this podcast are never to convince or persuade you, because at the end of the day, first of all, that would be taking away your power. Second of all, I know the right people will find it. So if that's you, hop down there, join the waitlist, we'll reach out, we'll give you more info. And I love you guys so much. I hope you have the best day ever. And as always, like I always say, may the source be with you. Peace for now.